Minecraft has a lot of fans. That can be said for a majority of its life, even tracing back to the beginning. From 2010 to 2016, this fanbase would be represented at several events where their love and loyalty would be displayed. It's a show with a very divisive reputation online. At first, it started as a celebration of all things Minecraft, but very shortly after, it became a catalyst in online cringe culture. Now, it merely serves as a disregarded predecessor to Mojang's more modern, but at times controversial, live shows. So today, let's talk about the history and legacy of Minecon. When I was younger, I wanted to go to Minecon so bad. I had this picture in my head of what I wanted it to be. A gathering of thousands of people, all just as interested in this thing as I was. An experience that felt exclusive to me and the other attendees. And getting to see in person the few individuals who made all of this happen. It felt like, as a Minecraft fan, I had to prove my loyalty and go to Minecon, because it in itself was proof to me that I had a place somewhere. Seeing this event unfold was like a justification for my own obsession with the game. In hindsight, I'm happy I never went. Not because I don't think it would have been fun, but rather because I know my younger self would have said something really dumb at a Q&A panel, and it would be my legacy forever. But when I would dream of going to Minecon, I'd always picture the 2012 and 2013 shows. However, the tradition started all the way back with Minecon 2010. Minecraftcon 2010. The naming there is a bit awkward, but I'll explain that in due time. And I want to throw out a quick disclaimer. Throughout this video, we'll be going over a lot of information that is 7 to 13 years old. So even after a lot of researching, there's some information that is seemingly just lost. If you have any of this information, whether it's supplementary or contradictory, please comment it down below. All of my sources and everything I use is going to be in a big Google document in the description. So if you're interested in researching it as well, feel free to check that out. So let's get into this. August 30th, 2010. Minecraft creator Notch flies to Bellevue, Washington to meet some of his idols. He mentions that he'd be more than willing to meet players from the area as long as they promise not to be creepy. Once he found out his schedule, he'd post once again on August 25th, encouraging the gathering take place on August 31st, as he has that whole day free. And as he did in the first post, he maintains the belief that the community should plan this event either on the forums, Tumblr, or Twitter. And he promises to attend, even if it's just 3 people sitting around in uncomfortable silence for 20 minutes. So, the planning would commence on a Minecraft forums thread. Unfortunately, the original text of this post was not archived, and it was changed after the event ended. But it still holds some cool details. Like official Minecraftcon 2010 name tags. It's kind of cool, right? It took 2 hours to make this. Yeah, I think they're neat. This is also one of 2 name tag designs, but the other one seemingly hasn't been archived anywhere. People would suggest meeting at Bellevue Square, Panera Bread, and the Crossroads Mall. But after much deliberation on the forums, they'd end up choosing the downtown park from 5 to 8. Some people planned to bring food and stuff for recreational sports. A few people even planned to stream the event. Though, as far as I know, the recordings of these streams are completely lost. So, when the day finally came, people who suggested the mall had their opinions validated. It rained. Attendees would crowd under trees, a tent, and a few umbrellas, and yell Minecraft whenever they see someone, presumably in hopes that they respond, like Marco Polo. When Notch arrived, he'd be surrounded by fans. They'd ask if Herobrine was real, how the creeper was made, and of course they'd ask for autographs. The range of people who attended this event was pretty limited. The group was mostly made up of younger men, some teenagers, some adults, which makes sense, but it does give us a nice point to refer back to with future Minecons. So, after 3 hours of Bocce Ball, the theft of said Bocce Ball, and a dinner with Notch at Red Robin, Minecraftcon 2010 came to a close with a final attendance of around 50 people. Notch would end up teasing some pretty interesting stuff, like polar bears. I assume this question was asked by the polar bear guy, who became the event's greeter of sorts, who would then go on to compile information about the get-together on a blog spot. And I mentioned that the live streams of the event have been lost, but on the blog spot, there's a transcription done by the forums user Stickman that covers a ton of the stream. Now, it's long, so I'll just go over some of the highlights here. Notch notes that he considers adding daylight sensors, trapdoors, minecart linking, lifts, shift clicking in the inventory, primitive armor enchantments including feather falling, mountable animals, oil lamps, decaying torches, windmills, oil deposits, snowy mountains, modding support, food stacking, moss spreading, entity-based clouds, beacons that lead to your last death, chalk to mark walls, leads, animal breeding, sunrise and sunset animations, pigmen, moon phases, alchemy, werewolves, extra armor slots for things like cloaks, cheese, maps, dragons, water gates, villages with different kinds of mobs that would determine if the village was peaceful or hostile, and better enchant rates for gold tools before enchanting was even added. It's interesting to see how much of that stuff would actually be added to the game eventually, but it's maybe even more interesting to see the stuff that didn't get added. Also, Polar Bear Guy would end up trying to plan another Minecraftcon in 2011, again in Bellevue, but it never saw the light of day. During the livestream, Notch would also express interest in a Minecraftcon 2011, only this time in Europe. But before we cover that event, I still owe you guys an explanation, and maybe even a confession. I may have deceived you. Despite me covering it first, Minecraftcon 2010 was not the first Minecraft convention. You see, to celebrate the game's first anniversary, a community-organized Minecon would take place. So I'm just gonna... Okay, so you see now it says Minecon, which is close. Also, I have to assume that Minecraftcon's clunky naming was to avoid stepping on Minecon's toes, though that's not confirmed. The event would be planned out on a forum post starting May 28th, shortly after Minecraft hit its first anniversary. A Minecraft Classic server would be hosted, as multiplayer alpha wasn't out yet, and there were specific plans for events to be held, like a spleef tournament, a building and a griefing competition, and an obstacle course race. Signups for each competition would be held for a few days following the thread's posting, and they'd take place on June 1st. The griefing competition would be cancelled, but Axis Ray would win Spleef, Real G would win Building, and Cool Pilot would win the obstacle course. And while the events took place on June 1st, it seems that many players had already logged in and made contributions to the world as early as May 30th. People would build whatever they wanted, wherever they wanted, whether it's an island in the sky or a club below someone's house. There wasn't much else to do in Minecraft Classic, and there wasn't a lot of space to work with, so you're left with a very interesting final product. It's almost similar to Reddit's r/place, their occasional April Fool's joke, where a big canvas is shared among every sub-community on the site. A user can contribute a single pixel of color every few minutes, and once the canvas is full, you cover up someone else's work in an effort to make your own picture. Revisiting this world is like that, but in 3D. The main draw of r/place was making sure that whenever the timer stopped, your subreddit would have some kind of representation on the final picture, forever cementing it there. And another aspect of this world heavily mirrors that phenomenon: the signature wall. Almost an entire edge of this small world was dedicated to people signing their username, all with distinct block choices and different writing styles in an effort to make them stand out as unique. Some of the earliest dedicated Minecraft players are now forever cemented in the game's history here on this wall. Again, this was before any official convention for the game took place. Community-organized events like this really go to show the strength of Minecraft's community. And just as he did with Minecraftcon 2010, Notch would spend some time at the gathering. Since this wasn't an official in-person event, that's as far as we're going to delve into it here. It would come to a close with a final attendance of at least 167. This number comes from us from user Veed on the forums, who counted and listed all of the signatures. And if you're interested in hearing any more about Minecon 2010, I do have an announcement. I toured this world nearly entirely and recorded it with commentary. If you're interested in seeing this, it'll be uploaded on my new second channel, BC at 3. This will be the place for stuff that I want to talk about, but doesn't exactly warrant a full written video. There's still some editing, so it's not raw footage, but if you want more low-key long-form content from me, check it out. But enough about me. The end of Minecon 2010 brings us to the end of the year 2010 for Minecraft's convention history. And just to be clear, going forward, there were more unofficial server gatherings for Minecons, but I won't be going over them in this video. So let's move on to Minecon 2011. If things look different, no they don't. No they don't. May 11th, 2011. Notch posts on Tumblr asking about the next Minecraftcon, which, unfortunately, we are still doing that name. He notes that both the official release of the game and a convention for that year had not yet happened. So why not do both on the convenient calendar date of 11/11/11. Interestingly, it seems as though plans for a convention in Europe had already changed, as his suggestion now is Las Vegas. The event would feature contests, food, parties, Q&As, and more. And he even had a ballpark figure for the ticket price, at around $90. This post makes it seem like plans weren't solid yet, as the wording is uncertain, and he's even polling for general interest. There was even a separate post made specifically to get opinions on the location choice. However, this post and Notch's estimates within it would prove to be fairly accurate, so it's possible that plans were more in motion than implied. A few months later, on August 12th, we get the best news ever. They changed the name to Minecon, and it's happening at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas. Sure, it's a week later than they had planned, but it'll be a 2-day event on the 18th and the 19th. There are 4,500 tickets priced at $99, only slightly higher than his estimate, and competitions and panels were planned. This post also featured a link to the official Minecon website, which sported a pretty snazzy banner. And I want to say something about this banner. Firstly, as a kid, I thought the fact that Herobrine was here was like the biggest deal ever. I was definitely the kind of kid to believe in Herobrine and Israfel. I was terrified of Israfel. And I guess I just thought they were going to add him because he was featured in this official art, which might sound far-fetched, but look right here. This banner predates the inclusion of Alex by over 3 years. You cannot tell me that's not Alex, or at least an early version of the skin. Sure, the pants are different and the shirt is less detailed, but I think there's even more proof that it was intentional. This banner is almost symmetrical. Note some of the chickens in the back, or how the cow and pig mirror each other, or even how the two biggest names in Minecraft at the time, Notch and Jeb, have their skins mirroring each other. With all this symmetry, I don't think it's too unlikely that Steve was mirroring his future counterpart, but that's just a theory. You thought I was going to say I didn't say it, but you might have. You wanted to. You did want to. This website would also feature mention of a sweepstakes for the first 500 ticket purchasers. The winner would get a room, a VIP seat, and a meal with Mojang. It's crazy that in the span of a year, Dinner with Notch went from being just an impulse Red Robin meal to a 0.2% chance offered only to the first 11% of attendees of a sold-out event. I think that gives a pretty good idea of the game's growth. Oh yeah, and tickets sold out. They had planned to offer them at the door for an increased price of $139, but that wasn't necessary. By October 28th, all 4,500 tickets had been sold. On November 7th, just 11 days before the event, Notch would post on Tumblr expressing that he's nervous about Minecon. Not for the event in itself, but more so what it would feature, like the full release of the game, because at that point, people will start reviewing it. But most of his worry came from something that, if you're familiar with Minecon, you'll probably understand. Public speaking. I don't want to get ahead of myself and spoil how it would actually end up, but Notch was nervous to speak in front of so many people, and felt like he would struggle with effectively getting a point across. But it was already in motion. The event was happening. On the 13th, Mojang would partner with Hat Films to make a Minecon trailer. It featured appearances from the Minecraft characters of the Yogscast, Captain Sparkles, Israfel, and perhaps the person that's most important in the story of Minecon, but we'll get to that soon. Their appearances in the trailer may have hinted at their attendance, as Mojang made a blog post confirming the Yogscast would speak at the event. In this post, they also announced the Minecon 2011 cape, the item that would single-handedly create a Minecraft username black market years down the road. Let's freeze this moment in time, the moment just before Minecon. An indie game is about to have its popularity and audience displayed at a convention center. What started as one man's personal project snowballed into this just 2 years after development started. If you're a Minecraft fan, you're cautiously hopeful. Sure, this event could be a ton of fun and could be a great opportunity to meet people with the same interest. But it could also be a disaster. If something goes wrong, it'll taint Minecraft's reputation forever, both the game and the community. And if you're one of the developers, what could you even rationally think? The growth that the game experienced was unprecedented. Your performance not only as a developer, but as a speaker and person was going to be subject to intense scrutiny, not only by the 4,500 attendees, but potentially hundreds of thousands of people online for years to come. And the guest stars at the event, like the Yogscast, had huge fan bases, but they weren't even at their largest. Every popular creator at the time was still growing. Minecraft was huge, but it will get bigger. And if you mess up, What happens to that audience? That career? But the 18th arrived. The stage was set, props were ready, and Minecon was happening. The opening ceremony starts with a humorous video detailing the history of Minecraft's updates up to that point. And we see our host, Lydia Winters, whom we saw in the trailer. She started out as a community content creator and would become Minecraft's Director of Fun. This wasn't her first public appearance with Mojang, but it may have been the most important one. This event would go on to define her as one of Minecraft's most definitive speakers, even to this day. On stage with her is Steve, the banner, which has surprisingly been updated to slightly change characters' positions, but most important of all, the Activate Minecraft lever. If you've seen my video on Minecraft's Adventure Update, you know how important this lever is, but let's not focus on it just yet. It's clear that Lydia does not have the same struggles that Notch does with public speaking. Throughout the entire opening ceremony, she's very direct and clear with her words as she describes what will be happening at the event. That may sound like the standard for most conventions, but there's a reason I'm pointing it out. Lydia is joined on stage by an, at the time, up-and-coming YouTuber, Captain Sparkles, to showcase his Minecraft music video. Initially, he planned to just attend as a fan, as he didn't think Mojang knew who he was, but ended up being featured anyway. The opening ceremony would tease most of the panels at the show, and at the end, it's a moment you've probably seen before, the official release of the game. Overall, it's a pretty good start. Surely the rest will go just as fine. Surely. Moving on to the event schedule, the game room opened up the same time as the convention. The game room included Minecraft, specifically the then unreleased Xbox 360 edition and Pocket Edition on the Xperia Play. Interestingly, the developers of the Xbox port teased Kinect compatibility with the game, though it would ultimately never come out. There would also be several indie games showcased, and while I couldn't find a full list, I did some digging and was able to find a few, those being Frozen Synapse by Mode 7, Here Comes Launchman by The Layabouts, No Time to Explain by Tiny Build, and Falleritis by Raincloud Games. I think the practice of showing off other indie games was a really good idea from Mojang, and one that shows their dedication to game development at any scale. There would be various panels, including one hosted by Machinima, including Chimney Swift 11 and Sea Nanners, a panel on Minecraft and how it can contribute to education, and map making. And this isn't all of them, but this is where a lack of archival becomes an issue. Some of these panels are just missing footage, but some of them have no traces online at all. The main panel of the day was one hosted by Mojang, featuring gameplay of some other projects, like Scrolls and Cobalt. This panel also featured a live Q&A section, which was actually pretty normal. Many fair questions were asked, not just about Minecraft, but also Scrolls and Cobalt. And after all the panels were done, the first night would conclude with a party. And we can start our second day with the costume contest, which was hosted by Lydia. There weren't a ton of contestants this year. Lydia does a good enough job presenting everyone, but the voting for winner seemed improvised. They chose the winner by applause levels, and it would end up being Crafty Minecrafter's wolf costume. The second day also saw more various panels, including one from Mojang's developers and another from the Yogscast. The day wrapped up shortly after those, leading to the closing ceremony. Lydia would present a goodbye video that was produced by Hat Films just hours before. Notch came out on stage to announce the winners of a giveaway from Jones Soda, who'd sponsored the event with custom-made flavors. And watch what happens.
Asia and Matt, do you see them? Okay, over here, come on up on stage. Can you tell everybody what it says?
Aww. After announcing a $20,000 donation to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, Mojang said their goodbyes, and the event was over. Well, not quite. There was still one thing planned. One thing that was probably the most reasonable way to cap off a gaming convention, a Minecraft convention. You know, a rave. An important thing to remember when talking about 2011 is that dubstep was inexplicably popular. And an important thing to know about Notch is that he really liked deadmau5. Enough so to give him the only unique player model. So have deadmau5 host Minecon's after party. For those 21 and over, go to the XS nightclub for the Into the Nether party. I think Notch was pretty happy about this. The party feels pretty unfitting, especially the dancers. It started off with just regular Minecraft music before the beat drop, but the dancers were still dancing to this melancholic lullaby music, which looks like kind of funny, but it's also a little weird, right? Attendees said the performance was good, so I'm glad they had fun, but something about this just feels odd. Maybe I just don't know how to party. And as it ended, so did Minecon 2011. And we aren't given a second of peace, as just days after Minecon ended, Notch took to Twitter. Oh no, suddenly he was outraged at some speakers from the event, the Yogscast, making claims that they behaved horribly by insulting people, refusing to cooperate, demeaning Mojang, and being egotistical. The Mojang Twitter would even echo some of these thoughts, but denounce how it was brought to the public first. And to this day, we still don't know the truth. Notch doubled down on his side, but would then apologize, only to retract that apology 7 years later. The Yogscast would deny the accusations, and that's pretty much all that happened. And that's as much as I'm gonna say, too, because only those involved know anything more about it. There was no evidence for any of these accusations, and while we could make assumptions with the benefit of hindsight, I just don't think it really matters. I don't think anybody really cares. The negativity following Minecon 2011 wouldn't end there, unfortunately. While many would regard their experience as positive, others had complaints about the event's management and planning, saying it was poorly executed and overcrowded, and that the wait in lines was so severe that some attendees would refer to the convention as LineCon. But there were some positives, specifically in the audience represented. Minecraft's community has become wildly diverse, and it's nice to see that start somewhere. And for another positive spin, the event was clearly seen as a success, as just by April of the next year, Lydia announced that Minecon 2012 is happening, and it's happening somewhere in Europe. Just a few months later, on July 18th, a big post on Mojang's blog shared that the plans were just about finalized, to hopefully be concrete within the next week. It would take a bit longer, but Minecon 2012's announcement video would release on August 2nd. We see the Mojang employees decked out in Disney merch, which leads Jeb and Notch to set Minecon at Disneyland Paris from November 24th to 25th. 4,500 tickets would yet again be sold at a price of $99, but not for long, as they sold out very quickly. After configurations for players with capes were implemented, 2012's capes were announced to be pretty and blue. There was a lot of uncertainty surrounding the first Minecon, but now plans have become more solid, so the general audience loses out a lot on the deliberations. Those organizing the event would divulge less about specific details, so we're actually already getting into the show. The opening ceremony begins again with a video made by Hat Films that shows Steve being sent back in time to Minecraft 1.0, the version of the game released at Minecon 2011. He has to make his way back to the then current version, going through 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4. 4 major updates in the span of a year is wild. I don't mind the slower update cycle we have today, but it's just kind of crazy to think about that. Once the video is over, we meet our host, none other than Lydia Winters. Right off the bat, she points out something that I've drawn attention to as well. More and more groups of people are being represented at these events. The main focus of Minecon 2011 was the official release of the game. The main focus of Minecon 2012 was this community. We're introduced to a much larger team at Mojang, to the point where they have to rush these introductions. The 2 faces of the Minecraft team at the time remain on stage, which they are clearly nervous about. The ceremony continues with the video Minecraft is Just Awesome by Varide, which is a parody of the Discovery video The World is Just Awesome. And shortly after, we see Captain Sparkles again with another Minecraft parody, this time Minecraft Style, a parody of Gangnam Style. When I set out to make this video, I didn't want to focus on Minecon just being awkward or cringeworthy, but this is tough to watch. And that's speaking as a Captain Sparkles fan. I mean, I even have, like, this thing. It's probably just from this not aging very well. I mean, everything happening here is very 2012, but this is rough. Very few audience members got up and danced as Lydia suggested they do, so it's just kind of... I don't want to focus on negativity though. Too much hate is thrown at these events and the people involved with them. And we'll cover that later, but for now, let's just close up the opening ceremony. Seth Bling announces that he and Hypixel worked together to recreate Team Fortress 2 in Minecraft, specifically the map Dust Bowl. I'm recording this on July 4th, by the way. If there's a huge summer update to Team Fortress 2, this version of me doesn't know that, but also if it sucks, this version of me doesn't know that. I live in a blissful ignorance right now of what's going to happen with Team Fortress 2. But once this video is out, I'll know. I'll probably know while editing. Interestingly, it includes every class except for Engineer, likely due to the lack of creative tools for Minecraft at the time. We then see Mojang's first entry in the Block by Block initiative, constructed by Fire UK. It's a replica of the Ndugu Playground in Kibera, Kenya. Then we see the announcement of one of Minecraft's most interesting ports, Pi Edition, which was a modified version of early Pocket Edition that could run on a computer that could fit in your pocket. Which, as I'm saying that, Pocket Edition existed, so it might feel a little redundant. We get a lineup of games for the Indie Game Theater, including Prison Architect, Thomas Was Alone, Curiosity / What's Inside the Cube, Gunpoint, and again, Frozen Synapse. After the opening ceremony concludes, we can get into the event schedule. Something really special about Minecon 2012, especially in regards to the previous year, is that a full schedule and the panels and events listed are available online, at least mostly, which means we have footage for most of this Minecon, which is a huge help. But that also reveals to us that there were a lot of scheduled events, split between 5 different locations: the Nether, the Stronghold, the Village, the Well, and the Indie Theater. A full list of all these events will be included with the sources in the description, but we're not covering all of them. If we did, we would be here forever, so we're only going to cover the most interesting ones. Not to say that some of them weren't interesting, just some of the panels are more relevant to the history and story of Minecon than others. And that's what we're here for. So, following the open, we move into an in-depth exploration of Seth Bling and Hypixel's Team Fortress 2 map, which starts out pretty strong, but quickly gets interrupted by what is assumed to be another panel's audio system, completely drowning out Seth Bling for several precious minutes. Not to mention that this panel focuses largely on command lines and specific details in Redstone that become very difficult to see on the small screen Seth Bling was provided. I loved watching his videos back then. There's a ton of really interesting Redstone explanations that you couldn't get anywhere else. So to see this panel be brought down by poor planning and audio issues is really disappointing. Through all that, the panel continues as smoothly as it can as he covers other Redstone projects and answers a few audience questions. Again, it's unfortunate, but he did the best with what he was provided. Our next item on the schedule is a chat with Vu and Notch. They speak about game development, specifically the early development of Minecraft. They cover the distribution of the game in early access, which at the time was not a popular option. They talk a little about scrolls and then move to audience Q&As. The questions asked are fairly reasonable and mostly cover pieces of the game's history, inspirations, and programming in general. They also ask about Mojang's new game and Notch's new game, Scrolls and 10 to the Sea, respectively, the latter of which was Notch's main project at the time, after leaving the development of Minecraft shortly after Minecon 2011. It seems that he wanted a panel to talk about 10 to the Sea, but wasn't provided one for whatever reason. Again, the questions are all pretty normal. As the years went on, these Q&As, including those who provided both the questions and answers, would be the recipient of intense criticism. But here, it's clear that these people are just very passionate and want to get advice from the person who, at the time, was the biggest face in indie development. After this fireside chat, we move on to a gameplay demonstration of Scrolls, followed by a few audience questions. It's clear that the audience for Minecraft does not have a one-to-one overlap with Scrolls. In fact, it's far from it. Attendees were primarily here for a sandbox game, not a strategy deck builder. It ends up being a decent panel, but it's one that feels a little out of place. The day would end with several events that all started at 3:30, including panels on both Pocket Edition and the Xbox port. But perhaps the most intriguing was the future of Minecraft from the PC team. This featured discussion from Jeb, Dinnerbone, Evil Seth, and Grum. Right off the bat, Jeb leads with a change in Minecraft's update cycle. He goes over the few named updates that the game has had so far, specifically in opposition to add whatever we're feeling kind of updates. So, going forward, the standard would be named updates. To this day, the game is still being developed with that mindset. The idea that most of the features of an update revolve around a central theme. And the first of this new style of update was the Redstone update, 1.5. Its first edition is announced to be the capacitor block. which I can only assume was an early design for the comparator. Jeb also announces weighted pressure plates, minecart improvements that would evolve into hoppers, daylight sensors, and fireworks, which would actually be added in 1.4.6, predating the Redstone update. The rest of the panel turns into a Q&A, which at this point we can assume that most of them will. Right off the bat, Dinnerbone hints at quartz, a new ore to spice up the nether, but then mentions something especially interesting, stating that once you kill the dragon, the end would transform into a new beautiful dimension. Keep that in mind. There's a lot of interesting bits of information here, especially regarding questions about features that would eventually be added. One attendee perfectly predicted slime blocks' interactions with pistons. Another asks about a block that would serve the same function as hoppers, which would be added in this update. But honestly, most of the questions and their respective answers are pretty underwhelming. It's no one's fault really, but most of the questions are requesting updates for just certain parts of the game. And the thing is, with a sandbox game in constant development, there is very little that doesn't have the potential of being updated. But even past that, a lot of the answers feel surprisingly negative. I haven't mentioned it yet because I'm doing my best to do all this chronologically, but the morning of the second day would see a panel from the Mojang team all about their plans for developing a new mod API, a new way for the base game to interact with community editions. So if the team members at this panel deem that anything relates too heavily to that topic, they just say mod API. I think they're trying to go for like a jokey kind of vibe with it, but they're not funny about it. It just comes off as awkward. This panel marked the end of the events for the first day, which meant that soon, at 8 p.m., Minecon attendees would have exclusive access to Walt Disney Studios while no one else was at the park. The second day starts off with panels as early as 10:30, including the aforementioned mod API panel. After that, there'd be panels on redstone, map making, and one from Captain Sparkles, titled Taking Over YouTube. It's pretty crazy to see that at last year's show, he was just a guest appearance during the opening ceremony. But here, he gets a panel all about his success since, which is exactly what he goes over, how he got into YouTube and how he's handled it since. But what I want to know is how he did this. You may be wondering more why he did that, and the answer is a Q&A. It's unsurprising by now, but this segment also had a Q&A, which, like the others from this year, was mostly decent, with a few awkward hiccups and, of course, a backflip. Regardless, it's refreshing how natural of a speaker Captain Sparkles is here, especially in relation to some of the other panelists. Not a knock on them by any means, but you can tell he is someone who is very comfortable in the position he is in. As his panel comes to a close, his work at Minecon 2012 actually isn't over. He serves as one of the hosts for a pretty important part of Minecon, the costume contest. Captain Sparkles stands alongside Lydia and Yon as Minecraft Style plays on a loop for 33 minutes. Actually, the song fades out while they're presenting the costume, and it kicks right back up the second they walk off. Some of this is pretty tough to watch. When you take the time to ask the contestants questions, the number and subject of which change from person to person, there's a lot of awkward pauses, because the interviewer doesn't know what to say, and the contestant doesn't know when to leave. Not to say that they didn't do their best. You can tell everyone involved wants to make this entertaining and fun. If they didn't want it to be fun, they wouldn't have played Minecraft Style for half an hour. Stuff like this should have been organized or planned in advance. Like the contestants staying on stage for a consistent amount of time. And if they're asked any questions, they should all be asked the same simple ones. And possibly as a result of poor planning, the costume contest results are actually going to be held until the closing ceremony. So let's go check it out. It's reasonable to assume that they held the results for the closing ceremony so that they had time to actually decide and judge. They didn't do that, or at least it doesn't seem like they did. They pick a few of the costumes they liked the most and have another Mojang employee just pick one. And the winner is TNT Girl. This costume contest and the judging of it felt very improvised, which I want to say it's fine. But a lot of these costumes are very convenient and were carried across country borders just to be here. So I think they deserve a little better, or at least just the bare minimum of having something planned out. Now is a good time to mention that there was also a building contest for this Minecon. It was announced and held before Minecon began, but the winners were actually announced slightly before the costume contest. 1,000 builders were given 2 weeks to build something following the theme of European/Paris adventure. Coming in third place is Tukes Ape. In second, we have Tasty Crabs, and Oviraptor came in first. Moving on in the closing ceremony, we have a premiere of a music video by Slam a Cow and Laura Shigihara, the composer for Plants vs. Zombies. After this, Lydia sends thanks to a bunch of different people, including the panelists and actually a large portion of the event staff, all of which were volunteers, which definitely cuts the organization of the event some slack. And while that might explain some of the mistakes, it doesn't excuse them. But shortly after those thanks, the recap video for the event plays, which marks the end of Minecon 2012. Well, almost. Turns out people in 2012 still really liked dubstep. So Minecon 2012 ended with a performance from Skrillex at Sight Du Cinema. This is actually a continuation in a series of Dot Parties, which were a collaboration event between Notch and Production Club. It was a private party with only 400 attendees, so there's not a lot of coverage of it online, but people seem to have enjoyed themselves. After this party is over, Minecon 2012 is as well. So, how did it go? Well, compared to last year's show, it's complicated. The event in some places was certainly more organized and professional. However, the moments when it wasn't great were arguably worse than Minecon 2011's mess-ups. For instance, the costume contest. In 2011, the winner was decided by applause, and this year they just chose a random team member to pick his favorite. As inaccurate as applause ranking can be, it's the opinion of a lot of people rather than just one guy. And speaking of those team members, you can tell the Mojang team, many of which were panelists, still aren't comfortable talking to their fans. Not to mention that those fans are, on average, younger than they were at last year's show. The culmination of these factors results in some pretty awkward moments. Lydia also continued to be a better speaker than pretty much everyone else, though her energy at this year's show did feel a little low. But as far as I can tell, after everything was said and done, there was no Twitter drama, which is good. This actually, as a whole, seems to be a lesser discussed Minecon online, but I don't even think that's a bad thing. I would take that over many of the following year's shows. So, let's get into those shows, starting with Minecon 2013. On June 27th, the official Minecraft YouTube channel would upload a video, which creatively announced the location and time for that year's Minecon: Orlando, Florida, November 2nd and 3rd, at the Orange County Convention Center. Tickets would be sold in 3 batches for $150 each. On July 31st, the first batch of 2,500 tickets sold out in 3 seconds. It's safe to say that the following 5,000 tickets didn't last long either, which, by the way, they raised the attendance cap by 3,000, which also included the press as they weren't given free passes. And of course, we have a cape. And just a few months later, we're at the event. We open again to a video from Hat Films, taking us through versions 1.5, 1.6, and 1.7, catching us up from last year. Lydia comes out on stage, and all of the energy feels like it's back, not only in her delivery, but the event as a whole. The set is more lively, there's tons of people, it all looks very promising. This opening ceremony also announces one-click broadcasting, a feature that I have no recollection of, and one that was removed in Update 1.9. We see the return of Captain Sparkles, as well as the introduction of iHas Cupquake to the Minecon team. Then we see a live performance and premiere of a parody of Paradise by Coldplay, New World. Also, just a neat little thing, Paradise by Coldplay was played at last year's opening ceremony. And right after that, Minecon 2013 is off to a start. And fair warning, while a lot of the panels have been archived, many have not. That being said, there are still quite a few. So, like with Minecon 2012, we're only going to be focusing on the most relevant panels, which also applies to all future Minecons. A couple of hours after the opening ceremony concluded, Jeb and a couple other team members host a panel all about Pocket Edition and where it's headed. This was before Bedrock Edition, so the strive for parity is not there. So development of this version of the game was just getting everything up to date with Java. But this was when most cell phones weren't very powerful, so some compromises had to be made, like the Nether Reactor, which would be added shortly after Minecon 2012. In this panel, they go over their plans for feature additions for the next couple of updates. They answer some prepared questions first, and then some from the audience. It's almost like the Future of Minecraft panel from last year's show. Most of the questions are just about inevitable updates, like, will texture packs be added? Well, probably. I understand there was less certainty at the time, but why wouldn't they want Pocket Edition to be as close to Java as possible? And because of that, a lot of this panel ends up being a pretty underwhelming Q&A session. I'd also like to talk about the visual aspect of these panels. I'm not sure if it's just a change in the way they're recorded, but a lot of these panels feel somewhat subdued compared to last year. There just doesn't seem to be a lot of life in the room. Though, to be fair, that's exclusive to the uploads. It could be an entirely different experience in person. After this panel, we have one titled Running a Server, which, if you know much about Minecon 2013, you might know where this is headed. It starts out as a decent conversation between a bunch of server owners. They talk about troubleshooting, moderation, staffing, just some good insight from people with experience. We get into the live Q&A section, and the first question goes good. They ask about bonding with staff members and get some pretty good responses. The second question, however, would go on to be one of the most popular moments from any Minecon. One that would heavily contribute to the public perception of these events as awkward. And it's one that you probably know. A younger member of the audience has a simple question. What's the recommended amount of dedicated RAM you should have on a server? Now, look, I know this could have been a Google search, but it's a kid, and this should be the best place to get a real valuable answer. And honestly, they did give a pretty good one. But this clip would go on to have a very notorious life outside of this event. But the rest of the panel goes just fine. These people are very clearly knowledgeable about the subject and are pretty articulate speakers. I suppose I shouldn't go throughout this whole video without mentioning Cobalt. Cobalt was a project by Jeb's other company, Oxide Game Studio. It's a 2D side-scrolling shooter with a nice soundtrack. It had a presence at this year's event, but also last year's. The game's place at Minecon is comparable to Scrolls. It's clear that it does not have the same interest from the attendees, no matter the quality of the product at hand. And just to give an idea of the audience interest, the games panel at Minecon 2013 is one of the least viewed videos on Minecraft's YouTube channel to this day, with only 24,000 views. And while we're focused on other games, I should mention that, as usual, there was a big indie presence this year. And I mean big, there were a lot of games here, including Cannon Brawl, Castle Story, Desktop Dungeons, Pig Eat Ball, Eden Star, Dungeon of the Endless, Aru's Awakening, Hyperlight Drifter, Sports Friends, and Nuclear Throne, Secrets of Raidicon, Contraption Maker, Shovel Knight, Maya, Sound Self, Broforce, Treasure Adventure World, and Journal. It's nice to see that even as Minecraft gets more mainstream, they never ignore their indie roots. And I might as well mention there was another Scrolls panel, albeit on the second day. There was also an actually really cool panel called the Sparkles Slamaroo Extravaganza. It's an animation-focused panel from Captain Sparkles, Slamacow, and Bootstrap Buckaroo. The host is from Dig Build Live, but they didn't get a part of the amalgam name for some reason. It's nice to see Captain Sparkles return, and it's also cool that Slamacow was able to be here in person this year. Minecraft animations were a huge part of Minecraft's early YouTube community, so seeing some of the most prominent figures of that realm all together in this room is pretty cool. After some general questions, we move on to an audience Q&A with some pretty good questions. No real standout moments like the running a server panel, but Captain Sparkles is requested to do another backflip. He unfortunately does not comply. And the last panel of the first day that we'll be covering was actually one that happened at last year's show, The Future of Minecraft. The same speakers are present, and the idea is pretty much the same. Go over the editions since last year and talk about future editions, which they actually don't talk much about. They mostly just focus on the plugin API and also announce Minecraft Realms. Then there's a Q&A that lasts just a few minutes at the end, where 4 whole questions are asked, and all of them were completely inaudible to the panelists, so most of the time is just spent repeating and clarifying the question. So, not a very strong panel. But maybe our coverage of Minecon Day 1 can end with a pretty good costume contest. Lydia is hosting, and Notch, iHas Cupquake, and Greg Aronowitz are judging. Right off the bat, we're told that this contest will be held a little differently. In the opening ceremony, Lydia announced that entries into the costume contest would be handed out to any cool costume she saw while just walking around. So, the contestants are already vetted a bit. Then, we're told that there are actually 3 different categories for the entries: skins, mobs, and team costumes. Their time on stage is much shorter on average in comparison to previous years, and general information like their names and costume inspirations are all printed out on a piece of paper beforehand which makes things flow much better. It's good to see that efforts to improve are being made. Things go pretty alright, definitely better than last year's, and the winners are actually judged and announced at the contest in a reasonable way. Well, except for the ties. See, the winner of the skins section was Steve on a mushroom. The winner of the mob section was a tie between a red dragon and Enderman, and the team winners were both an Ender Dragon and a Spider Jockey. After the costume contest concluded at 6, all 7,500 Minecon attendees were granted exclusive access to Universal's Islands of Adventure, which normally fit 40,000 people. Thus, the first day of Minecon 2013 came to a close. There were a comparable number of panels on the second day, but there's only really one that's relevant to this video: the interview with Notch. Despite some moments in the Q&A that would go on to be popularized as cringe clips, this panel doesn't really have much going on. Actually, most of the questions asked had already been answered at previous shows. However, this would be Notch's last appearance at Minecon. It's clear to see that with each passing year, the appeal of the event is wearing out on him, as is his connection with Minecraft. But just a couple of hours later, we'd see the closing ceremony, of course hosted by Lydia. We get a recap of the costume contest, and a live performance of Join Me Stevie, a parody of Call Me Maybe, complete with dancers. Also announced here were the winners of the Minecon 2013 build contest, the theme being Halloween. In third place we have Fireflies, who also was a winner from the costume contest. In second, Neon Tiger, and in first, Tuxape, who, if you remember, placed third at last year's build contest. Then another premiere, this time Caveman Films' parody of Wrecking Ball, followed by a near missing child incident.
We're gonna talk about his video in 1 second, but I just needed to see if I could find Garrett Reiner. Is Garrett Reiner in here? If he could come up to the stage, his parents are looking for him and they're kind of worried. Garrett Reiner.
The kid was found, and Mojang says goodbye. And after another dot party from Production Club, Minecon 2013 came to a close. I know my retelling of the closing ceremony might have been a bit bare, but it's just that as we cover more of these Minecons, a lot of stuff starts repeating itself. There's always a thank you to the volunteers, a recap video, and a celebration of the attendees. It's important stuff, but you can expect it at every event. So, what did people think? Well, lucky for us, the Minecraft subreddit actually had a mega thread for people to talk about Minecon 2013. Some people thoroughly enjoyed it, and others were disappointed. A few common criticisms popped up, some of which I echoed in our retelling, like lack of professionalism and planning, some underwhelming panels, and again, long lines. One I haven't spent a ton of time on, however, is the abundance of kids in the audience. With every passing year, more and more kids attend Minecon. It's part of Minecraft as a whole attracting a younger audience over time. But unless your panelists are prepared to talk to children, things are going to go a bit weird. Not to mention that a lot of those panelists are covering information that is not very interesting to young people. For now though, let's just sum up Minecon 2013 as a controversial one. Just like Minecon 2012, there was obviously more time put into certain parts, but some of the aspects of the event continue to be executed poorly, some even worse than previous years. Either way, it's clear that people want Minecon to be good, both the organizers and the attendees. So perhaps there were some improvements in Minecon 2014. Some people may see this as an improvement. Yeah, so Minecon 2014 never happened. On March 30th, Lydia announced that they had planned to have it in Europe, but for some unknown reason, it would be radio silence after, until August 21st, when Vu would announce that Minecon was being pushed all the way to next year. Up until now, every Minecon had been held in the winter, so you might be assuming that this applies here too, right? Well, no. I assumed that to make up for missing the entirety of 2014, Minecon 2015 was announced to be happening early in the spring, and it's taking place in London. The reasoning behind Minecon 2014's cancellation/delay is unknown still to this day, but a lot of people assume it had something to do with Microsoft's acquisition of the game. It happened around this time, so it's possible that it may have been an inconvenience to the organization of the event. There isn't much else to talk about in regards to Minecon 2014, except for the fact that it's referenced in one of the console edition's tips. So let's get to Minecon 2015. Right off the bat, there's a crazy change. Tickets are way more expensive at $190 each, and the attendance has been raised to 10,000. This is a really big number, and so big, apparently, that it won a Guinness World Record for most attended convention for a single game. The event would take place at Excel London from July 4th to July 5th. Also, this year's Cape was pretty interesting, as for the first time, console and mobile players would receive them in the form of an Alex and Steve skin pack, which also included those of previous years. Starting with the opening ceremony, our typical opening video isn't from Hat Films, but rather another big name in Minecraft at the time, Element Animation. Not to say it's bad by any means, but it is different. It does a good job at setting up the event. Vu also gets his start as a prominent Minecraft speaker at this opening ceremony, and Stampy closes off the open, and he seems pretty accustomed to public speaking. To be honest, this opening ceremony felt a bit lackluster. Maybe it's because I've watched so many of these that I'm just personally tired of them, but it felt like a lot of rehashing. Well, except for one thing, the announcement of Minecraft Story Mode. Also, Minecon 2015 is set to feature an indie zone, including Gang Beasts, Sublevel 0, Unbox, and Monster Mingle. And the same rules apply, where we're only going to be covering the most relevant panels from this Minecon. The thing is that there aren't many of them. Most of the panels featured here were also featured at previous years. This isn't really Minecon's fault, as there's only so much to talk about, but there are some other weird choices. For instance, these are 3 separate panels: Teaching with Minecraft, Using Mods for Teaching, and Overcoming the Obstacles for Gaming in Education. And speaking of using mods for teaching, what about getting started using mods? Or mining the code one mod at a time? Or extending Minecraft through custom content, which discusses, you guessed it, mods. I'll spare you the names of the 3 map-related panels, but the topics they're choosing to talk about feel a little stale, not only in the context of Minecon as a whole, but specifically this event. And I know there's probably some places where past Minecons also suffered from the same issue, but for me personally, they more often than not made up for it by offering some really cool insight. This isn't meant as a criticism on the panelists, but more so the organization of the panels. So I'll be covering the panels more briefly and generally. The presentation of the event has been heavily upgraded. Things definitely look more professional overall. Bigger screens, better audio systems, and most of the speakers are comfortable speaking. Between most panels, there were bumper sections comprised of interviews or just updates from a few select hosts. So in chronological order, we have Seth Bling and Ant Venom hosting a set seed glitchless speedrun race years before Minecraft would take off in the scene. Illumina wins with a time of 13:42. Then we have a map making panel hosted in part by Tukes previous build contest winner. And while we're here, there was no build contest for this year, and we'll cover its replacement later. We then have a panel for the console edition of the game, where members of 4J Studios are giving beginners redstone tutorials, which suits the demographic of this convention well, primarily younger people who mostly played Minecraft on consoles. Then, as is tradition, we have the costume contest. Lydia takes a bit of a backseat this year and is instead a judge, alongside Vu and In the Littlewood, also known as Martin. The lineup here works pretty well. Everyone feels prepared and comfortable. They decide to announce the winners at tonight's live show, which is different. But before we get into it, let's cover a few more panels. We again have panels on Scrolls and Cobalt, which officially has beaten last year's panel for lowest views at only 11,000. And also one from Achievement Hunter that starts out with the 2 panelists saying their inclusion was rushed, with Matt even saying he didn't even feel like doing it.
I didn't even feel like it, to be honest.
What's that?
I didn't even feel like doing it, to be
That's not
honest.
very nice.
Which I respect him for admitting it, and it is pretty funny, but ultimately it's not a great look for the organization of the event. Alright, here we are, the Minecon 2015 live show, featuring Cirque Bijou. It begins with a roughly 30-minute evening entertainment segment, which includes trapeze artists, stuntmen, and Steve cosplayers going absolutely wild to AWOL Nation's Sail, and, of course, Pitbull's song Celebrate from the Penguins of Madagascar soundtrack. Once the show really starts, we get another live performance of a Minecraft parody. This time, Make a Cake, based on Katy Perry's Wide Awake. Then we finally get our costume contest results. In third, a Guardian. In second, a Spider Jockey. And in first, receiving a flashy custom engraved trophy, the Silverfish, which for dedication alone, he totally deserved this award. And then this happens? I don't really know what to call it, which naturally leads into a Daft Punk inspired light show. Then even more performers. All in all, it's pretty neat. It's not at all what we've come to expect from Minecon, but it does show how the budget and potential have expanded. But with a live performance and the costume contest results already out of the way, what could they have in store for the closing ceremony? Well, before we find out, let's quickly cover the second day. The first panel of the day is another speedrun, commentated by SethBling and AntVenom, this time of a puzzle map called Diversity 2. JMall116 wins it. Then we get to a consistently controversial panel, the future of Minecraft. This Minecon coincides with the development of Minecraft 1.9, the start of one of Minecraft's most controversial update themes, the combat update. But the more universally liked features are shown off here, namely those relating to the end. They show off shulkers, tipped arrows, and end cities, while also mentioning the ability to respawn the dragon, which means that they also show off the end gateways, which, if you'll recall, they teased in Minecon 2012, a new beautiful transformation to the end. They'd also show off a pretty sizable update to Pocket Edition, followed by a closing Q&A. Shortly after, we see what may have replaced the building contest, the live build battle. The contestants were a bunch of content creators, including GizzyGaza, the Achievement Hunters, DanTDM, Stampy, and many more. This build battle doesn't really stand out to me. It feels like a video that you could have watched on YouTube, which I think is what they're going for. I'm led to this conclusion because they have DanTDM do just that, a live performance that matches his YouTube videos. And if you're confused why this kind of thing is at a convention, well, look no further, because your answer is in the audience. This is, by far, the most children that have been to a Minecon yet. Most of the creators at this year's event garnered a following primarily comprised of kids. So for them, this is like a concert and a meet and greet all in one. You get to see one of your idols doing what you love to see them do, all right in front of you, and you get a chance to ask them anything you want. That's an awesome opportunity for them. And this type of panel is not overbearing at Minecon 2015. There's still lots of others for older attendees. With that, our coverage of Minecon 2015's panels come to a close, which means, of course, the closing ceremony. It's the shortest one yet. We have the typical thanks, then Lydia visits the crowd for some of their closing remarks.
Well, spending it with lovely girlfriend here.
Aww.
And speaking of which, Emma, will you marry me?
Yeah, it was about time for another Minecon proposal. And we're already watching our closing montage just 20 minutes in. Following this, they replay the opening animation, and then we're done. And there was no official after party either. So, when I started writing for this Minecon, I went through all the material. The ceremonies, the panels, everything. And I felt nothing. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something just felt off. So I thought, you know what? I've been writing all day. Maybe it's messing with my judgment. I'll just come back to this one tomorrow with a rested mind. The next day I realized I think it was just bad. That may be an overstatement, but it all feels so hollow. It was much more professional and well executed, don't get me wrong, but what if the lack of those things is what gave the previous Minecons some life? What we're left with by Minecon 2015 is a sound product, but it's one with a very different tone to the previous years. 2015's event almost reflects Minecraft's journey from indie to mainstream. It starts as amateur and relatively unknown, but as it gains more popularity, it has to get better. It has to be safe, and it has to prove itself worthy of the position that it's in. It's inevitable, and you can't really be mad at it. You can lose interest, for sure, which I think a lot of the game's audience did around this time, specifically the older demographics, but it might be a hard change to adapt to. Minecon 2015 also serves as the starting point for the more negative reception of the event and Minecraft's community as a whole. That's something we'll cover more in depth later though. For now, let's continue to move on, to see where Minecon went next, and whether or not the changes introduced with 2015's show were furthered upon, or if Minecon took steps back towards its roots. A video uploaded on March 7th would answer the question we're all asking. Where is Minecon 2016? Well, as revealed to the audience and the especially stylish Jens and Lydia, Anaheim, California. More specifically, the Anaheim Convention Center from September 24th to 25th. There would be 2 batches of $6,160 tickets sold, giving us our highest attendance for a Minecon yet. Capes would be distributed similarly to last year, including the skin pack. So, let's let Lydia introduce us to Minecon 2016.
Set up and ready to go. God, what's setup. I still don't know what we're doing here in this huge and strangely empty convention hall in the middle of Anaheim. You said you had an awesome
What?
day of adventures.
Who are you? Where's Lydia? So they get transported into Minecraft, and they do like a neat little in and out of the game type thing. But their journey ends, and then we see Lydia. I'm gonna expose myself just a bit here, but you have to promise me that you won't look at me differently. I was a theater kid. Not to the same extent or in the same way as a lot of other people, but I was in a competitive acting team. This involves and inspires a very specific style of acting that has become really easy for me to notice. And they are good at it. They're facing outwards to the audience even when they're talking to each other. Their lines are spoken very specifically, and it's clear that a lot of work and rehearsing went into this. But in my experience, it was always a bit more enjoyable when things were looser, both to watch and to act out. If you adhere too closely to your plans, you become stiff and robotic. Now, that's the critique I'd give if they were doing this for adults. However, by 2016, Minecraft's community was predominantly children. It's something we saw happening gradually with each event, and it takes full effect here. You can also see this reflected in Element Animation's contributions. Last year, their video had some humor that adults could find some enjoyment out of. And I don't think the same thing applies to this year's. So for a show for kids, they did great. They knocked it out of the park. But I'd be lying if I said it was a 100% enjoyable watch for anyone else, which kind of goes on to describe most of Minecon 2016. Even in the opening ceremony, they have a really big focus on Minecraft and education, saying things like, "Wouldn't you like to play Minecraft in school?" Also, Stampy and iBallistic Squid have a sizable presence here, and at the time, their audience was mostly younger. They also announced 1.11, the exploration update, followed by a weird Enderman, and a piece of trivia I never knew, and what I can only assume to be a thread? Same rules apply, we're only going over the relevant panels. But before we do that, I want to go over a hopefully complete list of the indie games showcased at this event. Ascension VR, A Dual Hand Disaster, Tooth and Tail, Future Unfolding, Goner, The Mean Greens, Shovel Knight, Dwell, Creepy Castle, Donut County, Staxel, Reflections, Blockhood, Planetoid Pioneers, Super Dungeon Bros, Azure Striker Gunvolt, The Metronomicon, Drift Stage, Kingdom Newlands, Ping, Disc Jam, and It'll Do Too. Okay, panel time. Presentation is pretty similar to last year's, including the bumpers in between panels. Though unfortunately the subjects of these panels are still a bit underwhelming, and I'm not alone in thinking that. To illustrate my point, I'd like to draw attention to the fact that Cobalt actually had one of the more popular panels. There's only 5 other panels with more views, with over 20 of them uploaded, and some of them are low. Some of them didn't even hit 10,000. And I know it'd be easy to take issue with the fact that this is how I'm gauging interest in these panels, but this is how most people experience Minecon. It was encouraged for anyone who couldn't attend to go check out the live streams and the uploads. And even though 12,000 people were there, that's hardly a fraction of Minecraft's community at that point. Thus, I'd say this leaves us with a pretty good idea of a panel's appeal. Moving on, the costume contest is actually one of our first events this year, taking place after the VR overview. It's Martin and Vu again. Their time on stage is shorter than it's ever been, which is not a bad thing. It allows for things to flow much more smoothly. There are a few moments where it feels a bit too rushed, but there's a lot of costumes, so I'd say they did their best. The winner was decided by a Twitter poll, to be announced at the closing ceremony. Stampy and Squid do a 3-part competition to find out who's the better Minecrafter, through trivia, building, and PvP. Squid wins. This is another one of those panels that was likely made to cater towards children. Not a bad thing, it's just important to highlight it. We see the return of Hat Films at Minecon, with an upcoming feature overview for Minecraft Console Edition. There's a few more panels for the day, but for our intents and purposes, that's the end of the first day for Minecon 2016. There was no party or performance, but that's alright. They start out the second day with one of these bumper segments, which sometimes feel more like mini panels. This short form might actually fit some of the panels better, rather than being an hour long. I think that could have made some of them more digestible. We quickly move on to Mojang's update panel, which is actually handled a little differently. They simply just go over the changelog for 1.11. Snapshots for this update had already begun rolling out, but they focused on covering features that hadn't been added in them yet. Most would be added in 16W39A, which came out on September 28th, a few days after the show. This goes much better than similar panels at previous shows. It feels like it has a purpose. They have a clear plan, and it's limited to that. Plus, there's no Q&A, which, after hearing the same questions repeated over and over again, I think is a positive change. There's another competition segment, this time between 4J Studios and Stampy's team. Pretty much everything I said about the last one applies here as well, except for the fact that Stampy wins. Then the stage gets swarmed. Our next event is a casual chat with Yins, which harkens back to the fireside chat of Minecon 2012. Back then, and even now, people don't give him the same level of excitement they gave Notch. Even if he's led most of Minecraft's development, he's always been seen as the guy who took over, and Notch has always been seen as a creator. But he's the one responsible for most of Minecraft's content today, so it's nice to see his side of things, both in and outside of Minecraft. Hypixel shows off one of their minigames, Creeper Carts. Hypixel has had a presence at most Minecons, by the way. I just couldn't find a great way to fit it in. And I figured now would be a good time because that's our last panel for Minecon 2016. So, as always, let's see what the closing ceremony has for us. The costume contest placings were revealed. In third place, the White Pumpkin. In second, the Bat. And in first, the Magma Cube, which I stand by because honestly, these were the coolest costumes at any show so far. Then, of course, a Minecraft music video premiere. Starless Night by Ant Venom, Blue Jerome, music by Pedro, and Jay Breeze. And I'm sorry, but I lied. Apparently there was a show on the first night. Lydia mentions it here. Fits and the Tantrums played. There's no video of it on Minecraft's channel, but there are some third-party uploads that help us out. The set list seems to be Out of My League, Run It, Break the Walls, Walking Target, and Fool's Gold. This wasn't listed on any of the schedules, or even the several hour-long live stream specifically of Minecon Day 1. Like that, it seems like a big deal. Nearing the end, we get a conclusion for the skit from the opening ceremony. Did you know that their names were Tim and Ella? I bet you didn't. They kill the dragon, thus killing Minecon 2016. What can I even say about this event? I mean, it's exactly what Minecon would become as the prime demographic for the game gets younger. It's not a show that's made to interest the same people as it once did. I'm not gonna sit here and say that it's the worst Minecon ever, but I also can't feign interest in it. It's just Minecon 2016. I don't know how else to put it. And like with last year's show, its public reception was tied into a much larger phenomenon that we'll cover at the end. But I believe in us. Let's keep going strong. Minecon 2017, here we come. Hopefully they bring out Lydia first this time. She's become one of the most consistently good parts of these shows. I mean, Vu's proved his speaking ability for sure, but is that Will Arnett? What is Job Bluth doing next to Lydia Winters? What is Lego Batman doing at Minecon? What does BoJack Horseman even know about games? Hang on a minute. I was too distracted by the Babe Wait Hey Babe guy from Hot Rod. This isn't Minecon. This is Minecon EARTH, also known as not Minecon. And it's for that reason that I made the tough decision to stop here. Minecon has always been a celebration of Minecraft's community, first and foremost. Regardless of what shape that community takes, Minecon has always been the place to acknowledge and celebrate it. But in 2017, the event was invite only. Tickets were handed out to Microsoft employees and their families, and they're also given to charities, which is a very nice and positive opportunity to grant someone. But it also means that the community at large, for the first time, wasn't there. Not only is that what Minecon is about, but that's what this video is about. Minecon started as a community event. It started as 2 community events, and up until now, that was the one constant. This show works better as a pilot of sorts for the Minecraft lives. Those aren't Minecons. They serve an entirely different purpose, and that's what this is closest to. But don't worry guys, we haven't seen the last of Minecon yet, at least not in spirit. There's always Minecraft Festival in Orlando. And we're going back to the Orange County Convention Center, just like in Minecon 2013. It looks like the date is set for September 25th to 27th, 2020. Well, a global crisis happened, so they pushed it to next year. Well, lucky for us, Minecon 2014 prepared us for a measly year's delay. We can wait. Okay, so the whole global crisis thing took a bit longer than a year, but it's 2022. It'll happen now, right? Okay guys, so I'm sorry to report this, but Minecraft Festival hasn't happened yet. And at this rate, it's hard to say if it ever will. They've got everyone hyped over Minecraft Live, which always brings in a ton of attention. They also probably cost a fraction of a full-blown Minecon. And since everything's pre-recorded, there's virtually no chance for things to go wrong. It's the smarter choice, really. To this day, we're still unsure if there will ever be another in-person official Minecon, or anything even similar to it. And the live streams just don't really fit this video. So, that's the end of our Minecon retelling. But that's not the whole video. There was a reason to covering all of this, and that's to look back at it all with hindsight to see what it meant for Minecraft and its community as a whole. There is a retrospective technique developed by Ellen Gottesdiener and Mary Gorman, typically used in a business setting for team building. However, I think it serves as a good template for us to analyze everything that we now know. It's called the 4 L's: loved, loathed, longed for, and learned. So let's start with loved, the good parts of Minecon. First and foremost, Lydia Winters. Lydia entered Minecon as any other community creator would, the same circumstances and experiences, but it was clear from the start that more than anyone else, she knew what she was doing. Against all odds, which, let's face it, were many, she managed to speak to the audience in an appropriate and mostly professional manner. Sure, there were some rough spots, but there's a reason she's been part of every Minecon since her first. She is just a good speaker. Some people criticized her for asking for applause too much, but that's just what being a good host for a convention with a lot of children warrants. That's why every costume contestant got at least 1 round of applause. She didn't want anyone to leave unhappy. Did it always work? Maybe not, but the effort was always there. And while we're focused on individuals, there's a huge name in Minecon that I've only mentioned once. Greg Aronowitz. That's right, the judge for the 2013 costume contest just happens to be incredibly important in the story of Minecon. Since Minecon 2011, Greg and his team at Barnyard FX have been the minds behind every prop you see. Bringing Minecraft to our world wasn't an easy task, yet they delivered year after year. Their dedication is clear to see, from making pixel-perfect replicas of game mobs and blocks to reinterpreting them in a whole unique way. Even if Minecon didn't always go perfectly, Greg and Lydia's contributions made sure to make the most of it, and they were consistent with it. Another part of Minecon is one that goes too easily overlooked: the indie showcases. Since Minecon 2011, the event's organizers always managed to pay respects to their roots in indie gaming. Even if a game was completely unheard of, it had a chance to get a booth at Minecon, and sometimes they'd be featured next to some of the largest indie titles to date, like Shovel Knight. They were standing in the proof that they can make it. They're where they are now because of an indie game just like theirs. In this way, Minecon often served as a miniature indie showcase. And perhaps one of the most interesting pieces of Minecon trivia occurred at the Hello Games panel of Minecon 2012. They're speaking mostly about their main project at the time, Joe Danger, but near the end, they dropped a little hint about a game codenamed Skyscraper. And they know it's not possible now, as it would only run on a supercomputer. One can only assume that he is talking about No Man's Sky, a game that I absolutely adore. Its launch was admittedly a bit rough, but now it is remarkably good. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't. But it's little stuff like that. Tiny details that have a great payoff if you just give them time. Like how Captain Sparkle started off only as a guest during the Minecon 2011 opening ceremony, but then went on to host several events at many following Minecons. And while we're speaking of Captain Sparkles, one of his most popular series was Maya Knight. Well, the producer of that series is someone we've actually seen here, only under a different alias. His name during Maya Knight was 16-Bit Deck, but it was previously Tasty Krabs, the second place winner of the 2012 build competition. So almost 2 years before the series would officially start, Both were a part of Minecon 2012. Another example is one I've already pointed out. Ape would place in 2 different Minecon build contests, even winning one, and then would go on to co-host a building panel. Minecon's sole reason for existing was the community, so it's nice to see connections being made like that within it. From the beginning, Minecon has always paid respect to those in and around it. For an example of this, look at the 2 different Minecon proposals. The first, at Minecon 2011, would go on to have a Minecraft-themed wedding, filled with the props made by Greg and Barnyard. Minecon did a lot of good for a lot of people, whether you're an attendee, an indie developer, or a community creator. However, we unfortunately do have to move on to our next L. As much as Minecon did right, it is ultimately an event filled with and surrounded by a lot of negativity. So let's move on to what we loathed. There were a lot of objectively bad things about Minecon. The event's organization as a whole is largely to blame. Since the first Minecon, there's problems with the audio, the planning, the hosting, the Q&As. There's problems everywhere, and many of them could have been avoided had it been for better preparation, which we did eventually see, but it was too little too late. Like the costume contest voting in 2016 being the best it's had yet, and then being the last costume contest. If Minecon 2012 and 2013 had the same prevalent issues as Minecon 2011, something is being handled improperly. This is an event with thousands of attendees who are giving up a lot of time and a lot of money just to be there. An event largely made possible by volunteers. An event that's supposed to be a celebration for those people. But time and time again, the festivities were brought down by the same issues. One of the most prevalent being the hosting of some of the events. Gaming shows, conventions, and expos are often filled with people who are not very extroverted. It's okay to be an introvert. I mean, I'm writing a Minecraft documentary. Do you think I get out much? But that doesn't change the fact that when you put an introverted person on a panel, they may be uncomfortable and they may make mistakes. It's not a knock on them as people by any means, but sometimes you can tell that they're not prepared for this. That's why we have Lydia and Vu. They are people who are good at talking to people. They find their footing with presenters eventually, but the first few Minecons have a lot of awkward moments solely due to this fact, which led to a massive uptick in cringe culture surrounding not only Minecon, but Minecraft as a whole. I mentioned the dedicated RAM incident specifically. It occurred at Minecon 2013, but if you look at the Google Trends results for that term, it peaked in 2015. This corresponds with the data for the search term cringe, which started rising around this time. Many of these searches are likely for Minecraft cringe compilations. I used to binge these things. I never saw anything wrong with it. I would just watch them and think, wow, Minecraft is cringy. That's coming from the same kid who, just a few years prior, was an aspiring Minecraft YouTuber making videos every week. Being at Minecon would have been the happiest moment of my young self's life. I could ask my favorite YouTuber a question that I'd been dying to know the answer to, stutter from nervousness, and end up sealing my fate for years to come. I was not a strong kid, so while I'd watch it happen to other people, I would have been crushed by it. And we have testimony for someone in this position. They say that the teasing would commence soon after, and while it was tolerable at first, it got to be too much, leading to breakdowns and insecurity. They thought their life was ruined. This story does have a happy ending. With the help of their dad, they turned things around and overcame every ounce of negativity that was once thrust upon them. But that's one story, and there were a lot of awkward attendees at Minecon. We haven't heard their side, but I can nearly guarantee it involved a lot of ridicule and harassment. A lot of the questions asked by these kids were very reasonable and normal, but they were met with the strangest responses I've ever seen from adults, leading them to feel like they did something wrong. It's pretty easy to see the differences in the crowds of each Minecon. The first year started off with teens and young adults, and with every year until 2016, the attendees would get gradually younger. People would remove themselves from it, as to not be associated with the game seemingly most popular with awkward children. And I know that because, for a while, that was me. So with the shift in the community, how did Mojang respond? Well, interestingly, we covered this pretty heavily with Minecon 2015 and 2016, but there would be more and more panels made specifically for children, and they'd seemingly also try to appeal to the parents with the overabundance of education panels in the later years. And every other panel by then felt pretty lackluster, so there wasn't a lot left for everyone else, including people that would have attended past shows. And I think we see the culmination of that in the skit performance of Minecon 2016. To me, that's Mojang officially recognizing Minecon as a kids event, which leads us into the next L, longed for. Everything here is pretty much directly in response to the last section. Minecon should have been planned and executed better. The Minecraft community came for a celebration, but they were given a product that, at times, was underwhelming and took too long to learn from its mistakes. And it should have included panelists and hosts who were comfortable in their position. I applaud them for their courage and their knowledge, but the fact is that many of Minecon's speakers just weren't prepared for it. As much as these problems impacted the show, I don't think Minecon was beyond redemption, to the point where a live show needed to replace it. So, what I long for the most right now is another chance. A chance for Mojang and Minecraft to escape the stigma surrounding their convention. A chance to make things right with the fans. A chance that we could have seen acted upon with Minecraft Festival. As well as their live shows perform, Minecraft hasn't had an official convention since 2016, and I think that's a huge missed opportunity. Minecraft and its community have had somewhat of a renaissance in the past few years, breathing new life into it and thrusting it back into the mainstream. For a while, it wasn't cool to like Minecraft. Here we are now. I suppose it's up to you to decide whether or not I'm cool right now, but the fact is that I would not have made Minecraft videos in 2016. No matter how much I liked the game, I had to bite my tongue to save my middle and high school reputation, which, as we all know, mattered a lot in the long run. So, as many faults as Minecon had, it's not without redemption in a return to form. But if they decide to give it another shot, it's important that they learn from their mistakes. Which leads us to our fourth and final L, learned. First and foremost, they have to make sure it runs smoothly. Take the time to plan things out. Like if they have a costume contest, plan exactly how you present each contestant and how and when the winners will be chosen and announced. Make sure the panel topics aren't too heavily centered on a specific age range of the community. And if they are, you have to provide alternatives so that everyone has something to attend. This shouldn't be a problem either, as most Minecons have had panels running at the same time, so an attendee gets to choose what they go to. The presentation of the event overall can also alienate parts of your community. Many older attendees are not going to want to see the skit from Minecon 2016. It's okay to have that as one of the many panels or events, but having that open and close the show can drive a lot of people away. And while we didn't cover them here, the Minecraft live shows have a lot of insight that can assist in planning future Minecons. The mob vote, while controversial, is an easy way to get people engaged and interacting, though at this point, I think they've exhausted its usefulness, as many people have expressed their frustration with Mojang's reliance on it. Making the show accessible and digestible as a single live stream leads to a lot of people clearing out a couple of hours to tune in. This practice wouldn't work if translated one-to-one to Minecon, though there may be something to take from it. Maybe host the in-person event and stream it to everyone at home, as much as you can at least. And if you have multiple panels occurring at the same time, make sure they're uploaded. We've lost pieces of Minecon history due to a failure to archive, so make the content accessible now and for years to come. You can also take a hint from other gaming shows, like Nintendo Directs, PlayStation Showcases, or even the Game Awards. Make your most important information an event. Have a big stream for the opening and closing ceremonies, and have big announcements somewhere in the middle. It's a multiple day festival. Streaming it like this would give people time to speculate and discuss. And people need more to talk about, because most of the Minecraft lives can really be summed up in a single paragraph, which admittedly does work for those shows. And lastly, learn from the community. Minecon, of course, happened because of the community. Pretty directly, too. It's a huge group of people that are capable of doing some pretty great things. Not only did they start Minecon, but they continued to volunteer at every one until the last. They kept showing up, no matter what form they took. But with a community so large, they're going to express a lot of different wishes for a future Minecon. And of course, it's impossible and unreasonable to answer every single one. People are going to get disappointed or mad at decisions that have to be made. But the time is there to plan and make compromises. I'm sure I'm not alone in requesting a Minecon that is good before one that's soon. But at times, you have to be careful. While it may not be the most popular trend anymore, there was a time when people harassed the attendees of this show. I wouldn't be surprised if this is what has held Mojang back from doing another Minecon. No one's gonna want to go to it if it has such a negative reputation. and Mojang probably doesn't want to host an event that allows for that negativity to spread. So it may seem like an obvious conclusion, but the community needs to be seriously taken into account when planning a future Minecon. So that's Minecon. Every beat of its history, from its highs to its lows. What started as a humble gathering for a relatively unknown indie game would quickly spiral into an annual tradition viewed by millions of people. At its worst, it's an awkward event that fails to celebrate the community it's trying to acknowledge. But at its best, it's a charming look into the history and development of what is now the best-selling game of all time. It may be best left to the past now. Maybe a Minecraft convention just wouldn't work today, and attempting it now could backfire spectacularly, leaving the community in shambles only shortly after its recent return. But it could be the celebration and common ground that the Minecraft community might desperately need. If you made it here, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it, or possibly even subscribing. This was a surprisingly massive undertaking that just kept getting more and more time intensive. And as I said in the beginning, I also want this video to serve as an archive of some of the more unknown parts of Minecon, especially because as I researched this, it was irritatingly difficult to find some of the information. So, as I said previously, a Google Docs page will be in the description with every source I used, hopefully in chronological order. So please, if you have any supplementary or contradictory information, I'd be more than happy to hear it. Because at the end of the day, human error is a real thing, and I definitely burnt my brain out just a bit on this one. So again, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.